Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Green Ribbon Science Panel meeting. My name is Christy Spotsville, and I'm a Staff Services Analyst with the Department of Toxic Substances Control. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. I'll be facilitating the public comment portion of this meeting and encourage you to provide us with feedback. Today's Green Ribbon Science Panel meeting is subject to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, which preserves the public transparency of the panel's discussion and decisions. You have all entered in viewer mode with cameras and mics turned off. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our website. If you are interested in providing a public comment, please click the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen when it comes time. We'll call on you based on the order of the raised hands and unmute you at that time. If you prefer the comment to be read out loud, you can type into the chat or email us at saferconsumerproducts@dtsc.ca.gov. If the meeting should crash or inappropriately end, first, try to rejoin the meeting. It could have been a problem with your internet. If that doesn't work, please wait 5 minutes and then try to rejoin because the host may need to restart the meeting first. If that fails, please check the GRSP meeting webpage for a new link in about 15 minutes. If it is a system-wide failure of Zoom, we will cancel the public meeting. Now, I'd like to introduce the Director of DTSC, Dr. Meredith Williams, to kick off today's meeting with some opening remarks. Dr. Williams?
Thank you, Christy. Welcome, attendees, to this Green Ribbon Science Panel meeting, and welcome, panel members. It's great to see all of you, even if it's only on screen. As always, we're so appreciative of the time you make to prepare for these meetings, to give us your thoughtful input in these meetings. It continues to shape the program and our approaches and help us make more informed decisions about priorities, about selections of priority products, about how to strengthen the science that supports the work that we do. So I can't thank you enough for making this time and spending it with us this morning. I'm glad that I'm going to be able to attend most of the meeting, hopefully all. We'll see how it goes. I'm sure that you all had a chance to look at Carl's video and get a sense of the work that's been going on. And then if you look at the agenda, there's such a breadth of topics that'll be discussed today that it's quite striking. And I think it speaks very much to the strength of the regulations in terms of being able to do things from leveraging new science to really looking at for ways to protect both natural resources and sensitive subpopulations. It really is, it will be quite a discussion today. Data science, exposure science, new chemicals of concern, community science. So it'll be a very interesting discussion. And of course, we can't do that breadth of work without a breadth of talent within the program. And I do want to take a moment to recognize the staff. It's a remarkable staff there, and today you'll get to see some of that. And I do want to take a moment just to recognize one particularly talented staff member who you'll hear from today, Chinyu Wang, who is leaving us. And he has been a tremendous champion of how to use exposure science for the work that we do. I will say personally, he has been a wonderful thought partner and provided a lot of leadership for me as I wrestled with some technical issues. He provided support as I served on a National Academy of Sciences panel, and I've never had the chance to really thank him for all of that. So I'm using my Bully platform to just take a moment to appreciate Chinyu and all that he brought to the department, and wish you luck, Chinyu, on your next adventure at EPA. Congratulations. With that said, talent will continue to be a theme as we move into 2023. You're all aware of the expansion of the program. I'm so impressed with the approach that Carl and Andre and the management team, the expanded management team, have put together to manage all of the expansion of the program, the new hiring, changes in organizational structure, the need to bring people on board and get them, get them situated so they can hit the ground running. I think we're very much set up for a great 2023. It's been, in some ways, one of the challenges with safer consumer products is there's so much work that happens below the surface in terms of an iceberg, if you think of that metaphor. And next year, I think that iceberg is going to pop up a bit, and there's going to be a lot of very visible activity that comes from the program, especially, again, as the program expands. I don't want to take too much time, so I'll stop there. Thank you all again for making the time, and back to you, Christy. Thanks.
Now we will have opening remarks and introductions from Kelly.
Actually, Art, are you doing this part or?
Oh, no, yes, but please, if you have any opening remarks, please provide them at this point.
I just want to welcome the panel and all the members of the public who are listening in, and thank you for your service to the state. You're bringing your individual expertise and your lifelong experience to help our state and the Safer Consumer Products Program and their talented team of scientists move forward to do the best job they can for our state, and through that, our state for our country. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Art's going to be chairing the first half of the meeting, and I'll be handling the discussion. So right before the break, I'll be asking you if there's topics that you'd like to cover in addition to the questions that the staff have raised. So if there's any items that you think might merit a discussion among the panel where we can give more coordinated feedback, please make notes of those and bring them up. We'll do that right after the break. Thanks.
Thanks, Kelly. I also want to thank the panel members for your continuing and ongoing support of the Safer Consumer Products Program, allowing the staff to design and develop and use Californians to use products that are chemically safer for people and the environment. So let's do some housekeeping. Christy's already given instructions to the public in terms of the Zoom instructions. So let me do that for the panel members. So first of all, please try to keep yourself muted when you're not actively speaking to reduce background noise. Second, at our in-person meetings, as you all know, we keep track of speaker order by flipping up our name tags. However, since that's not available during the virtual meeting, the easiest way for us to track the speaker order is to raise your virtual hands. And to do that, what you need to do is open up the participants window, and at the very bottom right, you're going to see a button that says raise hand. And when you're called on, please unmute yourself. And when you're finished, please remute your microphone and lower your hand. And as Chris indicated, please use the chat function for technical issues. Before actually going on to the presentations, let me do an official roll call and ask the members to introduce themselves for the record. So I think it's the easiest if I call on people as opposed to doing some geographic or whatever other order of speaking. So let me just go starting with Melanie.
Hello, I'm Melanie Marty. I used to be at Kelly PA's OEHA, but I'm completely retired now. Woohoo! Except for the occasional project. But I was a retired annuitant for quite a long time, and I finished doing that. So I'm on this panel. I'm on a couple of other committees, and that keeps my brain going. I spend a lot more time biking and skiing now, cross-country skiing, not downhill. Although I do that, just it's crazy expensive now and so crowded.
Thank you, Melanie. Let me ask Ann Blake to go next. Ann?
Good morning, all. It's great to see everyone. Ann Blake, a long time ago, part of DTSC. for 20 years, environmental and public health consulting, and as of March of this year, ED of the Jennifer Altman Foundation in Bolinas, California.
Thank you, Ann. My co-chair, Kelly.
Sure, Kelly Moran, I'm a senior scientist at the San Francisco Estuary Institute, and pleased to have the honor of co-chairing this panel, hopefully for not too much longer.
No, that's for me, not for you. Molly, would you mind going next, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Molly Jacobs. I am our Director of Applied Research within the Sustainable Chemistry Catalyst and we rebranded Research Institute out of the Lowell Center for Sustainable Production at the University of Massachusetts Lowell.
Thanks, Molly. Dennis.
Yes, Dennis Schusterman. I'm retired from both State Health Department and UCSF. I'm active in training our residents in occupational and environmental medicine. I'm also a Master Gardener volunteer with a special interest in soil science. So, and finally, I have a clinical presence one day a week at UC Berkeley as a per diem physician.
Thanks, Dennis. Tim Malloy. Tim.
Thanks, Art. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, I guess, depending on where you are. My name's Tim Malloy. I'm at the University of California in Los Angeles in the law school and in the School of Public Health.
Thanks, Tim. Elaine.
Hello, Elaine Cohen-Hubble with US EPA's Office of Research and Development. I've been with ORD for 25 years. Currently, I am in their Center for Public Health and Environmental Assessment. And I guess in my free time, I'm the editor-in-chief for the Journal of Exposure Science and Environmental Epidemiology.
Thanks, Elaine. Let me go to Jack next. Jack.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Jack Leonard. I spent 36 years in regulatory affairs and formulation chemistry for Unilever, now consulting for the personal products industry, focusing on air quality regulations primarily, but also toxic substances.
Thanks, Jack. Mike?
Mike Carangello, first of all, jealous of all the people who are talking about being retired. I am with SC Johnson, Director of Strategic Corporate Initiatives. I've spent more time than I care to recount in consumer goods and the chemical industry.
Emma.
Hello, everyone. Emma Lavoie, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I'm an environmental toxicologist and currently a senior science advisor in the Office of Research and Development.
Thanks, Emma. Suzanne?
Good morning, everyone. I'm also not retired. I'm an associate professor at Oregon State University in the Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Sciences Department here. And I also do some consulting now for the Environmental Defense Fund as a senior contributing scientist. Happy to be here today.
Thank you. Helen.
Hi, I'm Helen Holder. I'm the Chief Technologist for HP's computer business. And in my prior role, I led the environmental materials program for HP.
Oh, thanks, Helen. And Julie? Julie, you're on mute.
She's on her phone. It does.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure how she unmutes. Is it *6 or #6 or?
No, sorry, I had to find it. I was on the wrong part of the screen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Hi, hi, my name is Julie Shanung. I'm a professor in material science and engineering at University of California, Irvine. I'm also chair of the department and nice to see everyone.
Thanks, Julie. And my name's Art Fong, and I am the technical leader for Smarter Chemistry at Apple. And Smarter Chemistry is one of our 3 environmental priorities, along with climate change and resources, well, actually finite resources. And it's been my great pleasure to be co-chair of this panel for what, the last 6 years, Kelly, or more. So I'm so glad that all the members are able to make today's meeting. So let's get started. Today's meeting will be brief and focused as we continue to use this online format. Carl Palmer will kick off today's meeting by highlighting a few key successes from the program update, which was provided to you in advance of the meeting. The panel will follow up with clarifying questions for Carl. Next, we will have the opportunity to hear from the public, and then we'll hear a series of presentations from SCP staff that will highlight the new methodologies, tools, and approaches that the department has been adopting in order to make their work better and solidify their decision-making. After these presentations, we'll have a short break and then a single discussion period for the panel to discuss the charge questions and the related feedback. Let's see. So at this point, Carl will now highlight a few key successes and updates since the last meeting, and then we'll open it up for questions on the program update. Carl?
Thank you, Art. First, thank you, panel members, for your continued service and time and energy. On behalf of all of our staff, I know that I want to express our gratitude for your input, not just in the meetings, but outside the meetings when sometimes we call on you for input as well. So we really appreciate that. It's been a busy year, and as you saw in the program update, I'm just going to do kind of a high-level review of those headings and a couple of key items, and then we'll have time for any questions you want to ask. As we pointed out, we continue to monitor all of the various authoritative lists that we pull into our candidate chemical list, and that's a fair amount of work. We've added a number of chemicals over the year, and we're considering adding a couple of our own in the future, so we'll hear more about that. So that's important because it's really our menu of chemicals that we can focus on in our work. We did this year adopt 2 new priority products. The first one being treatment products containing PFAS. These are materials that are used on leather and other textiles, things like that you put on your boots. So that was adopted in April, and we're in the process of getting notifications from the manufacturers and going through the process. We also just adopted nail products with toluene, which will take effect in January, and that will start the process of alternatives analysis as well. And there are a number of products that are in the queue actively. There are probably 4 that will come into effect this coming year. Importantly, tires containing 6 ppd, laundry detergents with MPEs, tires containing zinc, nail products. We have 2 nail products, priority products we're focusing on that are a result of a lot of the work we did in terms of both our information call-in to manufacturers and our lab study. So there's a lot going on those fronts. I want to highlight a few other things that are not just in line with producing the widgets, but important work. So one is we received a pollution prevention grant from US EPA that we're going to be looking at the alternatives analysis process or alternatives assessment, particularly focused on EJ communities and see what tools we can develop and how we can make sure that we serve those communities with our process. And so that we're excited about that. We also, importantly, as you know, we've been involved in a lawsuit for the last few years. The ACC sued us on our spray polyurethane foam priority product listing, challenging our fundamental process. I'm happy to report that the California 5th District Court of Appeals found in favor of the department on all fronts on that case. So that's important for us on a couple of levels. One, we're going to be starting the regulatory response process right away for SPF products. And then we're also happy that this has really provided a good affirmation of the construct of both our regulations and our decision making. So that's important. I want to highlight there's a variety of laws that the California legislature has passed. The most important to us is probably SB 502, which provides us with new authority to collect ingredient information from manufacturers. So we're looking forward to how we're going to use that tool. It also allows us to point to other AAs that are done that meet our standards that we can pull into the process without having to go through that front end. So that's important as well. Also, you know, everything we do almost is a function of collaboration and coordination and learning. And, you know, you guys are a big part of that, but we also work very actively with other states, with professional organizations, with industry and academia in terms of issue-driven meetings and things like that. So we do a lot of that, and that's going to continue. I'm really happy to report that we renewed our memorandum of understanding with US EPA for safe and sustainable chemistry. And I specifically want to thank Emma of our Green Ribbon Science Panel, who was key at EPA to herding all the cats and getting everyone together to move forward on that. And we're going to be looking at some specific projects we're going to be doing with EPA to make that real. And lastly, I'll just mention that, as Meredith said, one of our biggest opportunities and challenges this year is growth. We're fortunate to be hiring 37 new staff this year. We've already started that. We've got some great new supervisors that we've promoted, and we're going to be in January and February really having an intense hiring effort. And we'll also be letting you know about that, because we really feel that our best recruiting mechanism are the people that we work with and the people already in the program. We'll be holding some open houses and things like that. So for people who are interested, we're looking for more good people to do more good work. And so I'll leave my summary at that and then just open it up if you have any questions specifically. Kelly?
Carl, thank you very much for the update. Just really impressive and amazing work. And I'm especially glad to hear about your ability to now attract and retain talent. So at this point, let me ask if the panel members have any clarifying questions for Carl. And go ahead and use the raise hand function that Christy and I gave instructions to at the very beginning. Let me start with my co-chair, Kelly.
I just, before I ask my clarifying question, I do want to take the opportunity to congratulate the department on the professional scientific publications, because that is not only good for the careers of the staff, more importantly, it's really good for the department to document what it's doing in a way that's scientifically credible. It makes it so much better for supporting regulations and sharing with industry and other affected parties how this kind of work is done. So data and other tools. I hope you'll be publishing some of that data work that you've been doing on the nail salon work. It looked to me like there were like 3 different papers that could come out of that. So my clarifying question is, you mentioned the partnership with US EPA, and while you may or may not be ready to talk about specific possible projects, I was just wondering if you could say a little more about the nature of the kind of work that EPA and DTSC might do together.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. First, let me thank you also for your point on publishing. You know, that was a point that the panel has made over the years, and we've taken that to heart. We're really blessed to have great staff, and we're spending more time taking those collaborations we do in particular and putting them out in the public through professional journals. And Elaine was one of the first people we collaborated with that, and we've published a paper with her folks. And there's more to come. There's several in the work. The nail products are going to have some papers that come out of that. And yeah, we're very excited about that. So thank you. In terms of collaboration under the MOU, what we decided to do, and Emma was a big part of this leadership on EPA side, is to get Andre and our leadership staff together with EPA staff and sort of talk about what we're each doing and where there's overlap of both expertise that could be shared and learned from, as well as directions we want to go. And so we've had a series of meetings where we've kind of talked about what we're each doing, and we've had a couple meetings now where we're kind of focused in, because we want to get some actual projects that have deliverables and commitments and timeframes. And we're still a little early in that process, but we're looking at things, for example, looking at the work we're doing on quacks and seeing how that aligns with a lot of the good work that's being done in ORD. And I think just as importantly as the specifics is sort of the relationship building, so that we make those connections, so that there will be I'm sure there will be other projects that come from those relationships. And I know that certainly EPA staff, our staff, we're never at a loss for good things to do. It's really about, do we have the time and the resources to do it? So this is, I'm excited about it. I don't know if Emma, if you want to add anything on that front.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I think you really highlighted the important pieces and the status and the value of conversations amongst organizations that are working in similar areas to encourage safer chemistry.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that we already knew is, EPA does a whole bunch of good work, sometimes under TSC or other purposes that we want to tweak or modify. And one of the things that's helpful is that they're being very helpful about saying how they can look at the models they're using and other things to say how we can make it real and helpful for our program. So it's really exciting.
And Blake.
Thanks. I'm still figuring out the hand thing. There we go. Since we're highlighting collaborations, I just wanted to say thank you from the Berkeley Center for Green Chemistry, for whom I'm on the board, and also on behalf of Meg Schwartzman, who was formerly a GRSP member, for the collaboration on the nail products work in our recent Greener Solutions program. I know the students very much appreciated it. It was a really stimulating thing to see in those presentations last week. They're always the highlight of my year. And so it's a thrill to be seeing. I know we've encouraged in the past greater collaboration with UC Berkeley, and so I'm really grateful to see that and very appreciative, and hopefully that's helpful to you all as well.
Thank you, Anne. We're really happy to have that long-term relationship with the Berkeley Center for Green Chemistry. I also wanted to highlight that, our staff have really promoted and developed our early career scientist program, where we're hiring interns and scientific aides, typically graduate students, who can come in, get good experience, but they're also super productive and have been a great asset. So we're looking at that both to develop, the future scientists, but also as a great recruitment tool. And BCGC has also been that. So thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Before I actually go to Jack and Mike, got a note from the audience saying that the meeting's going really great so far, but they've asked us to, where possible, try not to use jargons and terminologies and abbreviations that we're all familiar with, but the audience and the public might not be. So if you can keep that in mind, that would be great. Let me now go to Jack.
Yeah, this is, I guess, a clarifying question for Carl. Obviously, you've got a lot of programs with US EPA, but many of your product programs are with cosmetics, personal care products, but EPA doesn't regulate those, either in the chemicals or the finished products. FDA does. So I'm just curious as to whether you've got any discussions going on with the US Food and Drug Administration, which actually regulates those products, not EPA directly.
Yeah. Thanks, Jack. Great question. Well, we several years ago started talking with FDA when we were looking at food packaging, and for which they have a role as well. And historically, we're trying to figure out the space between the use of pesticides and cleaning products and things like that. So we have a pretty good relationship. We don't have an active collaboration. We don't have a active MOU, but we do share information and we have some good context there. So, and I think PCPC is actually, or excuse me, the Personal Care Products Council has been an industry group that has really helped facilitate those discussions, both with FDA, but also importantly with their members. And the information call-in we did with nail products was a good example of, we worked with them on refining the questions so that they made sense and things like that. So, but there's more to do, certainly.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Mike?
You just had to find the unmute there. First, a comment on the chemicals of concern. I thought the additions were good ones. I thought that was really interesting. But what I thought was really interesting, and it really shows the level that you take the analysis, was that you also removed some. You found some that you altered what you were looking at, and then you took some off for the time being. The list can't always be, oh, we're just going to add add everything. It's got to be well thought out, and that really demonstrated how deep dive you do into all of those things. The question I had, or the topic of interest, was with the toluene and nail polishes. I was interested that you put that default level of 100 ppm to try and weed out the impurities for toluene rather than intentionally added. And I was curious as to if you find that sort of low level as you are doing surveillance, are you going to go back to those companies and at least let them know, hey, we're finding this here. We're not we know it's an impurity, or we assume it's an impurity. We're not saying you have to be part of the program, but you might want to take care of that.
That's a good question, Mike. Just a little clarification. Yeah, I mean, with toluene is in nail products is the first alternatives analysis threshold that we've set, and the regulations provide that framework so that we could make sure that we aren't capturing manufacturers who aren't intentionally adding chemicals of concern at a level of concern. And so it's not a risk-based action level. It's really a practical level. And that came out of our lab study, where we found when testing products, we were surprised to see the level of contamination at very low levels, and we didn't want to capture those folks. So we've communicated that back to the industry in general, there are findings. I'll have to check with staff to see if we've actually notified the specific companies where we got the hits on that, and we can do that. It's all public information. But yeah, it's been a very important learning process for us as we look at formulated products to see that, what's in there intentionally, what's in there not, and sometimes we know the manufacturers don't necessarily know that. Similarly, we will be doing those AATs for other products where we found that that's an issue. So this was sort of an important first step for us in that process. I see Ann Cooper has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify also that even if they are below the AAT, they still have to submit an AAT notification where they let us know that they recognize that their product does have this concentration, but it's below the AAT level, and they have to provide some kind of demonstration of why they know that it's below that AAT level. So they're still part of our process. They're not just going in the AA route. It's more of a exemption, if you will, from the AA. So still part of it, just a little different.
Thanks, Ann Cooper. And I think if you recall at a previous GRAS presentation on 1,4-dioxane, we would do a similar thing, and we know that's a contaminant that no one really wants in there. And so our focus on that is looking at, are there ways to make that level even lower, which we know that there are. So thank you.
Carl, thank you. Are there any more questions for Carl from the panel members? Well, if not, again, Carl, thank you very much for the program update. Before we begin today's panel presentations and discussions, we'll take now at this time, take public comments. Christy?
Thank you. We ask that your comments, if you have any, are directed to the Green Ribbon Science Panel and that they are focused on the agenda topics. As this is a working meeting, the panel will be accepting comments, but will not be responding to questions. Just a reminder, you have three ways you can click you have three ways to comment. You can click the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen, and we'll unmute you when it's your turn to speak. You can type it into the chat, or you can send us an email at saferconsumerproducts@dtsc.ca.gov, and we'll read your comment out loud. We'll give people a couple of minutes to raise their hand or send us a comment. I'm not seeing any raised hands. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I'm not seeing any comments, so we'll close out the public comment period today, and I'll pass it back to Kelly.
Thanks very much, Christy. Okay, now we're going to start our series of presentations on the various projects that SCP has been working on over the last year. To kick things off, we're going to hear from Andre Agassi as he sets the stage for the various ways that SCP has been employing new methodologies, tools, and approaches in order to solidify SCP's decision-making. Andre?
Thank you, Art. So in November of 2019, we gave you an overview of our process for identifying products and chemicals for regulation under the SCP Safer Consumer Products Framework. And we talked a bit about some of the policy and regulatory considerations that go into our decision-making. We also highlighted some of the challenges that the Safer Consumer Products Program faces in choosing products and chemicals to regulate that are going to be impactful. So some of the challenges that we talked about at that meeting in 2019 were the difficulty in obtaining product ingredient information and also market data. Secondly, the need for additional tools and expertise to allow us to use large data sets to answer research questions that could inform our decisions. And then thirdly, we had identified some gaps in our subject matter expertise that at that time we were already working to fill. And Xingyu is an example of that. We didn't have exposure science expertise until we hired Xingyu, and it's really been a boon to the program. So in selecting products and chemicals to regulate under our framework, we're sort of governed by the key prioritization principles that we talked about previously. There has to be potential exposure to one or more of the chemicals from the candidate chemicals list in the product, and that exposure has to have the potential to contribute to or cause significant or widespread harm. So we have a lot of latitude in selecting consumer products and which ones we were going to regulate. We want to choose wisely because there's an opportunity cost. There's a lot of work we're committing to when we select a consumer products for regulation under our framework. So that's why trying to address those challenges is so important. Today, we're going to highlight some case studies, projects we've undertaken to address some of the challenges that we talked about previously. And these include forming partnerships with government agencies, specifically EPA that you've heard about, NGOs and university researchers, using data science and exposure modeling approaches to identifying products and chemicals for potential regulation under our framework, and using community science to generate data that informs our regulatory decision-making. You've also encouraged SCP, and we've just heard it again from Dr. Moran, to publish our work in the scientific literature, and that's also an element in some of the projects we're going to be telling you about today. So I'm really excited for you to hear about 4 projects that highlight the way SCP is building its capacity to meet the challenges that we've had faced since the program's inception. And I think you're going to be impressed with the work done by SCP's excellent staff and our excellent collaborators and partners to fill data gaps and build our capacity to look beyond the keys that are under the lamppost. So without further ado, let's move on to the presentations. The first person you'll be hearing from today is Topher Buck, who is one of our senior environmental scientists, and he leads our newly formed Data Science Analysis and Interpretation Unit. Topher will be giving you an overview of our collaboration with a nonprofit called Cleria and how this partnership aims to better understand the presence of candidate chemicals in consumer products in the marketplace. Thank you.
Thanks, Andre. Before I start, let me just check that you can hear me all right. Okay, see nodding heads, so thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to describe for you our collaboration with Cleria. Chris, let's go to the next slide, please. So I know that typically we do acknowledgements and thanks at the end of a presentation. I've got a friend who often says that he thinks it's important to lead with gratitude. So that's what I'm going to do here today. I'll start by saying that, of course, as is generally the case, it's a team effort, and there have been a bunch of people that have been involved in this work, but I particularly want to acknowledge and thank Abigail Noble. As some, if not all of you already know, Abigail recently left DTSC, and that's a big loss for us, for the Safer Consumer Products Program. Abigail brought remarkable skill, intelligence, and passion for the work that's been a huge asset to the program over the last several years. And she initiated and did most of the work on the collaboration with Cleria, and frankly, including a lot of the work to create this presentation. And I want to state right up front that I'm still getting up to speed on this project, but I will do my best to give you a sense for the promise of this collaboration. Next slide. So just very briefly to outline, I'm going to just give an introduction to Cleria. I'm going to talk about, or sorry, I'm not going to talk about the organization itself, the business model, the leadership, et cetera, just the sort of information platform, if you will. I'm going to describe the deliverables outlined in the contract that we recently executed with Cleria, and then I'll briefly discuss how we expect this collaboration to benefit SCP. Next slide, please. So simply put, Cleria is a technology platform that you can think of as having two fundamental components. One is a consumer-facing side and a research side, and the two are connected or share a set of data that sort of sits in the middle. Next slide. So on the consumer side, there is a mobile phone app, a smartphone app, and a Chrome browser extension that you can download and install if you're so inclined, and that if you use it when browsing products sold by currently 5 online retailers, and you can see them listed here on the left of the slide: Amazon, Walmart, Sephora, iHerb, and Target. Cleria gives users of the app or the browser extension looking at products through those retailers real-time feedback on how the ingredients and the products they're looking at have been classified by a number of authoritative bodies. And when users of the smartphone app or browser extension visit the product pages, Cleria scrapes the product data, including ingredient lists, and saves the data in their database. So effectively, Cleria is crowdsourcing the collection of product information from these large online retailers. Next slide. So on the research side, Cleria then cleans, processes, analyzes, and stores these crowdsourced data in its proprietary database. And these data are what we've contracted with Cleria to get access to. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to pause for breath here and let you take in this whole diagram once more. And I'm then going to shift to just talking a little bit about a small pilot project that we did with Cleria about a year ago. And I'll show you one result of that pilot study just to sort of give you at least a sense for some of the promise of this collaboration. Next slide, please. So this is a glimpse at some of the data from the pilot project, as I said. And the pilot project only looked at hits or instances of candidate chemicals showing up in the Cleria database. But this pilot project, unlike the work going, that we've initiated, did not provide specific product chemical combination information. But in this case, I'm just showing a slide that shows you some information about looking at approximately 115,000 ingredient lists, product ingredient lists. And that work identified around 200 candidate chemicals, 30 of which were deemed prevalent, which for us in this case meant having more than 500 hits, or instances showing up in more than 500 in separate individual products. So on the right here, the bar graph shows you the top candidate chemicals identified in that search that did not have specific exposure qualifications, such as being hazardous in respirable form, which in this case particularly applied to titanium dioxide. And as you can see, the data were dominated by a few familiar classes of chemicals and one fragrance chemical, Lilial, that's been in the news relatively recently. as I said, sort of about 200 candidate chemicals identified. The last bullet on the left, as you can see, there were from anywhere from 1 to roughly 20,000 instances or hits per candidate chemical. 20,000 in this case was for titanium dioxide, which, as I said, we were excluding due to exposure considerations. You can see that the next highest chemical, again on the right at the top of the bar graph, was D5, which showed up about 8,000 times. Let's go to the next slide, please. So some caveats, of course, as generally the case, there are caveats with Cleria. It does not cover all the product categories that are relevant or of interest to safer consumer products. It, of course, again, being it is focused on ingredients that have, products that have ingredients listed on the label. So effectively that means personal care products and cleaning products. So it would not, of course, include tires and building products and some of the other product categories that are of interest to us. And for the same reason, it only covers chemicals that are listed on ingredient lists. So it doesn't include contaminants or undisclosed ingredients, with a couple of exceptions, and I'll get to that in a moment. It, of course, only captures the presence, not the amounts of chemicals in products. As we know, ingredients lists do not provide, present composition or the like. I think certainly you can infer generally, right? Ingredients are listed in order of prevalence, and you could probably do some inference, but for the most part, it's really just looking at, is this chemical present in a product or not? As you can probably imagine, because of the technology, it only captures products sold online. So it often doesn't capture really small boutique or local brands that are not marketed through these 5 retailers. And of course, the accuracy of the ingredient information depends for the most part on manufacturers, because if an ingredient is mislabeled or doesn't appear on a label, then Cleria is not likely to know about it. Let's go to the next slide, please. So one exception here, for example, that I want to talk about, and I should say an exception to the case that Cleria can't know about ingredients that are not listed on a label. Cleria recently collaborated with the California Department of Public Health, and specifically with the Safe Cosmetics program, to get information reported to the Safe Cosmetics program, CSCP, under the recent Fragrance and Flavor Ingredient Right to Know Act, which requires companies to report the use of potentially toxic fragrance and flavor ingredients to the state. So Cleria has been able to get access to that data set, and that, of course, allows them to provide information about the ingredients in fragrances, which I think, as most, if not everybody knows, are often listed simply as fragrance on an ingredient label. So that is one way, and I think this is certainly not the only way, but is one of a creative way that Cleria is working to supplement the information that they can get from product ingredient labels. Let's go to the next slide, please. So to get to the contract that we have with Cleria, what that is going to do for us, there are 2 principal deliverables in the contract. The first will provide us a list of all the candidate chemicals found in the Cleria database, with the information about the products in which they are found. So this is different than the information that we got from the pilot study that I showed in the slide a couple of minutes ago. So of course, this is going to allow us, it's going to be much more important, and is going to give us more power, if you will, to identify meaningful or important product chemical combinations, and also perhaps to explore combined exposures, cumulative exposures to the same chemical or to chemicals that have same hazard endpoint. The contract also provides for 4 smaller custom queries that are tailored to our research that we can specify throughout the contract period of performance. And of course, we don't know yet what those queries might be, but we can imagine that they might allow us, for example, to look for the prevalence of potentially safer alternatives in specific cases, or the prevalence of candidate chemicals or contaminants, sorry, I should say candidate chemicals that tend to appear as contaminants via a proxy. And I could talk a little bit more about that in the question and answer period if you'd like. I think in the interest of time, I'm gonna move on. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that really want to emphasize here is that this collaboration really allows us to take advantage of some relatively sophisticated data science capabilities that we certainly don't yet have in-house, and whether or not we will ever have them, is questionable. So it's great to be able, of course, to essentially outsource some of that when and where we can. And particularly in this case, like we're really benefiting from Cleria's ability to, as I say here, aggregate and interpret messy or noisy ingredient information. And this may seem trivial, but it really isn't. Abigail had a lot of confidence and was very impressed with Cleria's ability to wrangle noisy data into something that's useful from a data analysis perspective. And the example shown here on the slide, just of course, is showing essentially 3 products. You can see, of course, the retailer, the product category, the name of the products, but particularly of interest here is the fact that you've got 3 different, in this case, 2 different chemicals, but 3 different names provided on the ingredient label, and then the candidate chemical name that Cleria was able to resolve. For example, you can see, of course, I've got it circled in red that in the middle row, methylparaben is misspelled. Cleria was able to find that, whether or not it was, spelled as one word or two. As I said, of course, for a human being looking at this, it's a trivial thing to recognize, but it's harder than you might think to do for a very large data set. And so again, this really benefits us to be able to make use of Cleria's skill in doing this so that we don't have to effectively. Let's go to the next slide. So another big advantage and point we want to emphasize here is I think frankly, the transformative potential of leveraging Cleria's data during our screening process, evaluating potential new priority products or product chemical combinations. Traditionally we kind of have to take what I think of perhaps as a somewhat one-dimensional approach, right? Where we've identified a product category that is of interest, and then we might do research to try and understand what candidate chemicals are found in that product category. We can, of course, also look at this from another perspective that slices a different direction by starting with a candidate chemical and asking what products contain that candidate chemical. And again, I think the real promise here of this collaboration is that it allows us to do this in a sort of two-dimensional sense, right? Where we can look at, or we will be able to look at the combination, the intersection of products and candidate chemicals. So we will not only be able to identify those combinations, we will have at least some information, much more information than we think typically can have about how prevalent those combinations are in the marketplace, at least within these product categories. So doing this will really kind of allow us to ask an important question, which is, what product chemical combinations exist? How prevalent are they? And again, I think this will really help us in our screening research, kind of kickstart, if you will, or supercharge it. Let's go to the next slide. I'm just going to wrap it up here. So the takeaway message essentially, right, is that the Cleria platform is unique. Again, we know that there are other data sets and, like the WorkSmart, the platform that Walmart kind of spurred the development of, clearly has a lot of this kind of information about product chemical combinations, we of course don't have access to that kind of data. And so a crowdsourced data set like Cleria has been able to create in a nonprofit is frankly unique. The contract deliverables really should fill a significant data gap for us. Again, that sort of ability to find product chemical combinations. This collaboration, frankly, is a great example of the kind of project that we'd like to do more of. And it's going to be a great learning opportunity for the staff here at SCP. And certainly, I think we hope and expect that it's going to suggest ways that we can more fruitfully approach other collaborations. We've already talked about the renewed EPA MOU, so that's just one example. And that is basically it. I would be happy to answer any questions if you've got them.
Topher, I think we're going to have a discussion on all of the presentations after the break.
Yes.
So at this point, would you mind introducing your colleague?
Absolutely, Art. Thank you. Sorry, I misspoke. So yeah, next we're going to hear from toxicologist Dr. Qingyu Meng, who, as you've already heard, works in the Human and Ecological Risk Office and supports safe SCP projects. Qingyu will be talking about SCP's internal and external collaborations that are actively working toward better understanding the product chemical landscape of children's products. It's all yours, Qingyu.
Thank you, Topher. Good morning and good afternoon to our colleagues on the East Coast. I'm introducing SCP's ongoing efforts on developing and applying state-of-the-science methods to prioritize and characterize exposures to chemicals in children's products. Next slide, please. I will first introduce the background and motivation, and then the two ongoing projects. The first one is using a systematic review and data science for initial screening of children's products. And the second one is using an exposure modeling approach to characterize children's exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals and their alternatives in consumer products. And finally, I will explain why these efforts are relevant and important to the program. Next slide, please. So we all know that children are not little adults, and early life exposure to toxic chemicals can cause long-lasting adverse impacts. But unfortunately, chemicals of potential concerns are widely found in consumer products. The SCP program gives special consideration to children as a sensitive subpopulation and listed children's products in our current 3-year priority product work plan. Next slide, please. In order to effectively regulate children's products, the program needs to understand the landscape of product chemical combination, exposure levels and predominant exposure pathways, aggregate exposure and cumulative exposure, as well as the availability of potentially safer alternatives. So in this effort, we aim to use the state-of-the-science methodologies, including systematic review, data science, and also exposure modeling, to meet the program's needs for product chemical prioritization and exposure characterization. Next slide, please. Regarding our ongoing efforts, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we're conducting 2 projects. One is our internal effort on the initial screening of children's products using a systematic review and data science. And the other is through collaboration with the University of Michigan on characterizing children's exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals in consumer products. And this project uses an exposure modeling approach and data science and leverage on the systematic review results. Next slide, please. In the project of initial screening of children's product, we examined how data science and customized systematic review approach can benefit identifying and prioritizing products and chemical for further research. We aim to generate the landscape of product chemical combination based on published data, prioritize candidate chemicals and products for further research. Next slide, please. So the data mining was conducted on 2 databases. One is Feuer's and the other is a high priority chemical data system. Feuer's is an online database containing over 160,000 chemicals with their hazard traits, functional use, and product categories. And the other database, reports children's products for the state of Oregon and Washington, containing 56 chemicals or classes of chemicals in about 4,500 products. And the other approach we use is a systematic review with the aid of a free cloud-based software called ssist. And the aim is to find product chemical combinations for children's products in the literature published in the past 5 years. And the approach started with the typical systematic review approach by developing a PICO statement, which is a population, exposure, comparator, and outcome, and search criteria. So after that, we scrutinized abstract and then the full article, and then mapping product chemical combinations. We're developing criteria to prioritize product chemical combinations for the research. Next slide, please. So this slide shows 2 examples of the findings so far. The circle packing figure on your left illustrates the type of children's products which deserve being further studied. And the chart on the right shows the chemical which draw most attention in the literature. So overall, we found that data mining and systematic review approach are viable for product types and candidate chemicals prioritization. Next slide, please. So here's another ongoing project, children's exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals in consumer products. We're collaborating with the University of Michigan using a exposure modeling tool called ssist to model comparative exposure of bisphenols in toys and aggregate exposure and cumulative exposure to parabens in other endocrine disrupting chemicals in personal care products designed for children. ssist refers to the UNEP CTAC toxicity model, which is a process-based exposure model, which means that this follows the chemical from its release all the way to exposure. And aggregate exposure refers to the exposure to one chemical through all pathways, and cumulative exposure refers to exposure to multiple chemicals with a similar mode of actions across different pathways. And this project will also produce a user-friendly model for our alternative analysis. And overall, we aim to improve our understanding of children's exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals in consumer products, improve our alternative analysis methodology and practice, and demonstrate ssist as a useful tool for both the CPAT and AA process. And next slide, please. So this is a 18-month project with 3 phases and 6 aims through the collaboration with the University of Michigan. So in phase 1, we focus on generating data, input data for ssist exposure modeling, including the present and concentration of BPA in toys and parabens in personal care products, as well as the potential alternatives and their concentrations, and other endocrine disrupting chemicals and their concentrations. And we also develop exposure scenarios, which is who uses what and how. In this phase 1, DTSC leads the effort. Next slide, please. In phase 2, the focus is on modeling itself, including improving the model and conducting aggregate exposure, cumulative exposure, as well as a comparative exposure assessment. Phase 2 will primarily be implemented by University of Michigan through the input from the Safer Consumer Products program. And next slide, please. Then phase 3 of the project focuses on training SCP staff and external stakeholders and how to use ssist as an exposure model for exposure assessment. And to improve the scientific rigor of this project, we have 2 independent external advisors to review documents generated from this project and also participate in scientific discussions. Next slide, please. This project has many deliverables. All these deliverables can be classified into 4 different areas. One is the landscape of product chemical combinations. One is a model improvement, and a third one is the exposure modeling, and finally is training. So items in red have been finished. Ongoing ones are in blue, and the upcoming ones are in black. So far, we have finished most of the product chemical combination search and are working with the University of Michigan to develop modeling plans. Next slide, please. One theme for this project is to characterize aggregate and cumulative exposure for parabens and other endocrine disrupting chemicals in children's products, in the personal care products. We have identified the presence and concentrations of parabens in personal care products. Those are the red, showing in red, under the approach. We're also identifying other endocrine disrupting chemicals in personal care products. Those are the blue items under the approach section. And we will characterize and prioritize exposure and co-exposures of those chemicals. So far, we have identified 6 parabens in multiple personal care products, including soaps and body wash, shampoo, and some skincare products. Next slide, please. And the other theme of this project is a comparative exposure assessment. We aim to identify alternatives for BPA in toys and parabens in personal care products and compare exposures. So far, we have identified 12 BPA alternatives and 8 paraben alternatives based on their functional use, toxicological profiles, and market availability. We have also developed exposure scenarios for exposure modeling. And University of Michigan team developed modeling plan for BPA in toys based on our input and charge questions. And currently, the external reviewers are reviewing the modeling plan. Next slide, please. I would say that this project is timely and very important for the program. The project is consistent with the program's priorities as stated in the 3-year priority work plan, including the product, the type of the product, and also the sensitive subpopulations. Methods developed from the project will address the program's research and practical needs, including mapping the landscape of children's products, predicting exposure levels throughout the life cycle of a product, and also estimating personal care products' contributions to the total burden of chemical exposure. So the product is linked to a number of ongoing efforts in the program, such as the children's product screening, alternative analysis, guide revision, data science, and also our intern program as well, student intern program. Some of this work actually were conducted and contributed by our student interns. So the project also complements our existing collaborations. For example, our collaboration with Elaine from the EPA. So there are some long-lasting impacts of this product as well. Those will be achieved through advancing science in terms of understanding endocrine disrupting chemicals in consumer products and the aggregate and cumulative exposures. And multiple publications are under planning and will be produced from this research. The methods established can be applied to other product chemical combinations as well. So next slide, please. We have a dedicated team to conduct this research, including the hardworking DTSC staff and interns, very supportive SCP managers. Actually, we have an unsung hero here is our director, Williams, who actually initiated this collaboration. Thank you for your vision leadership. And we also have collaborative external experts. Thanks to the whole team, the dedicated team, and thank you for your attention. Next, we will hear from our senior hazardous substance engineer, Dr. Tom Bruton, as it provides an update on SCP's use of data science and systematically explore the use of quacks in consumer products, as well as the availability of hazard trace data for this diverse class of chemicals. So, Tom.
Thanks, Jingyu. You're a tough act to follow. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Tom Bruton, and I'm pleased to be here this morning to be able to share with you some work that we're doing exploring uses and hazards of quaternary ammonium compounds using a data-driven approach. Next slide, please. For background, quaternary ammonium compounds, or quacks, as I'll call them, they're also sometimes called quats, are a broad class of hundreds of chemicals and chemical mixtures whose structure generally includes a positively charged nitrogen atom, where that nitrogen atom is linked to 4 different substituents, which are often alkyl benzyl groups. And key features of quacks include their permanent positive charge, number 1. Number 2, that they tend to contain hydrophobic alkyl chains. And then stemming from those first 2 points, that they tend to be good surfactants. Next slide, please. Quacks have many uses, including as antimicrobials in hand soaps, sanitizers, and wipes, as disinfectants in surface sprays and wipes, as preservatives in personal care products, paints, etc., as anti-static agents in hair conditioners and fabric softeners, as algicides for swimming pools, golf courses, and other outdoor applications. And this is just a partial list. And I should point out here that this is a general understanding of where quacks are used, but as we understand it, there's not been a class-wide systematic assessment of which particular quacks are used in which particular product categories. Next slide, please. Why are we concerned about quacks? Well, for several reasons. One is exposure potential. Many quacks are high production volume chemicals, and there's a common hypothesis out there that that use of quacks has increased in recent years due to increased use of disinfectants due to COVID. And there are data in the environmental monitoring literature that tend to support this, including data that show levels of certain quacks in indoor dust and in biomonitoring specimens at higher levels during the pandemic as compared to before the pandemic. Another reason for concern is persistence. So quacks have been detected in multiple environmental media around the world, and they tend to show up at particularly high levels, up to hundreds of milligrams per kilogram in sediments. And so that tells us that at least certain quacks in certain environments can be quite persistent. Another concern is toxicity. Respiratory toxicity for certain quacks is well established, especially in the context of occupational exposures to cleaning products. Aquatic toxicity is established for a number of quacks, and there is an emerging body of literature that implicates certain quacks as developmental, reproductive, and even mitochondrial toxicants. Finally, the link between widespread use of quacks and other disinfectants and increased antimicrobial resistance is also a concern. Next slide, please. Another piece of our concern around this group of chemicals relates back to this idea of looking for the keys under the streetlight, where if you're only looking where you know to look, you're going to be limited in what you find. And this idea is relevant to the world of quacks research, where the focus among environmental and environmental toxicology researchers has been on a handful of around 20 quacks, but there are hundreds of other quacks that are in use and that have been less well studied. Next slide, please. So the goals of our project are to determine which quacks are used in which products, which quacks have hazard and exposure information available, and which products are within our scope here in the SCP program. And what I mean by that is which uses tend not to be dominated by products that are FIFRA registered, where FIFRA is the federal pesticide regulation. So our approach to answering these questions is to use a systematic screening of databases And what we hope to achieve with this project are, of course, a list of potential priority products for further research, but also highlighting some of the high use, low data quacks that are out there and doing what we can to clarify quack nomenclature, which can be confusing with multiple names referring to the same substance and some substances being, it goes both ways. Some substances have multiple names and some names refer to multiple substances or mixtures, so it can be confusing. Next slide, please. The first step that we took in this work was to create a master list of quacks. And we did this by compiling lists that other organizations, governments, nonprofits, and even business organizations have put out there. And after cleaning up that data and removing duplicates, we were left with just around 6,300 unique names and CAS numbers for quacks. That's not to say that these were 6,300 unique chemicals, but rather 6,300 unique identifiers. Next slide, please. From there, we assessed the use of those quacks in products using the Mintel database. And if you're not familiar with Mintel, it's a company that focuses on capturing information about newly launched products. So if a company launches a new consumer product, Mintel goes out, purchases that product, they take pictures of it, they record all of the information on the label, including ingredients information, and they upload that into their database to which we subscribe. And so for this project, we downloaded the ingredient data for all beauty, personal care, and cleaning products in Mintel for the last 5 years. And that added up to just around 140,000 different products. We then queried all of that product data for the quacks on our master list. And overall, what we found were 263 different quacks on ingredients lists for over 19,000 products across 78 product subcategories. Next slide, please. This is just an example of the type of information that we're harvesting from this. So on the left here are different subfamilies of quacks. That's what those fun acronyms are. And across the top are different product subcategories. And so this is showing the prevalence of different subfamilies of quacks within the particular product subcategories here. And I'm using hair products just as an example. And so the quotients that are shown here are the number of products within any given product category that contain a quack in that quack subfamily. And for example, for shampoos, just over 2,500 of nearly 4,000 shampoo products contain a chemical in the subfamily Acmanac. And so takeaway from this is that some of these prevalence numbers are quite high. These chemicals tend to be used a lot in certain product categories. And just what's resulting from this effort is a lot of different product chemical combinations. Next slide, please. Where we're at now is working to integrate all of these different pieces of information that we've pulled together. In particular, we are assessing hazard and exposure data or data gaps in some cases for some of the high use quacks for which we found high prevalence in products, but which have been mostly off the radar of environmental researchers. That includes substances such as cocamidopropylbetaine, polymeric quacks, organoclay quacks, and others. Next slide, please. The expected outcomes that we're working towards on this project are, again, a list of potential future priority products, but we're also hoping to publish a journal article highlighting some of the high use, low data quacks that we've come across and making recommendations around nomenclature. We're also excited to be exploring a collaboration with US EPA under the MOU that you've heard about to model toxicity and fate of some of the data poor quacks. And then more broadly, we are gaining experience screening a large chemical class with a lot of uses. And that's something that's going to be useful for SCP as we move forward. Next slide, please. To wrap up, I'd just like to acknowledge the rest of the team that's been working on this project. And we won't take your questions now. We'll do that at the end of the session. And with that, next we'll hear from Senior Environmental Scientist, Dr. Kelly Grant, on the topic of SCP's ongoing work with DTSC's Environmental Chemistry Lab and 1,4-dioxane in personal care and cleaning products. Kelly will also highlight a new collaborative community science project and how its results have identified indicators of environmental inequity within select personal care and cleaning products. Take it away, Kelly.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks for your wonderful presentation. So good morning, I'm Kelly Grant, and today I'll discuss the EJ or environmental justice concerns with 1,4-dioxane in products that was discovered in part by a DTSC community science project. Next slide, please. So we've talked about 1,4-dioxane at previous GRAS meetings, but just to give you a little reminder, 1,4-dioxane is a possible carcinogen. It's persistent and mobile, which means it's difficult to remove from both wastewater and drinking water. It's a frequent contaminant in personal care and cleaning products, particularly those that suds. And there was very little recent data about the amount in products. Next slide, please. In past meetings, we also discussed the environmental justice concerns for 1,4-dioxane in drinking water. So here you can see the Cal virus screen map, where the warm colors show the more impacted communities. And particularly in the LA area, you can see that some of those same communities had 1,4-dioxane detections in drinking water above the EPA guidance level. So our concerns about aggregate exposure led us to ask questions about the potential for disproportionate exposures to 1,4-dioxane in products in these very same communities. Next slide, please. To address these data gaps and concerns about aggregate exposure, SCP tested products for the carcinogen. We tried to be inclusive and represent products that are marketed to different ages, genders, income levels, ethnicities, and cultures. But as all of you know, if you've ever walked into a grocery store, there's such a vast number of products that we could never hope to get a sample that represents the demographic diversity of California. Next. However, I think our intention to shop in different stores and represent different markets really paid off when you compare the results of our product survey to New York's. So New York was asking a very different question. They were completing their product survey about the same time that we were, but they were focused on understanding products that were already complying with their impending regulatory limits. And when you compare the data from the roughly 150 or so products that we tested and the roughly 100 equivalent personal care and cleaning products from New York, you can see that the data is quite different, particularly when we look at the maximum level. And I think that's really reflective of our efforts to represent products marketed to these different demographic groups. Next slide, please. So here are the results of the SEP phase of the product testing. Now I realize this is probably pretty hard to see, but we've got cleaning products on top in orange and a variety of personal care products down below shown in blue. And what I hope you can tell is that most of the products are clustered below 10 parts per million 1,4-dioxane. But there are clearly some products that are outside that typical range. Next slide, please. So if we look at the data through the lens of products that are targeted to specific ethnic or cultural groups, we can see that products that are marketed to the Latinx or Hispanic community had much higher levels of 1,4-dioxane. And I do want to point out that there are some challenges with purchasing that make it really difficult to be representative. For example, in the 2019-2020 timeframe when we were doing this purchasing, it was extremely difficult to find skin cleansing and cleaning products specifically marketed to African Americans. So this coiled hair category represents shampoos marketed to African Americans, but it is not representative of a broader array of products. Next slide, please. So if our representation is imperfect, how do we help fill in some of these gaps about products that are used by different communities? Well, the answer is pretty simple. We need to engage the community and learn more about those products. But that's not always easy or straightforward. And that's where ECLs or the Environmental Chemistry Lab down in Pasadena program that was created by Dr. Mui Kultanoff created this Toxic Crusaders program. And that's where this program really comes in. So we created this program when she partnered with LA public high school called Huntington Park Institute of Applied Medicine, or HPIAM. And I didn't know it at the time when SCP got engaged in this project, but Huntington Park is 97% Hispanic or Latinx, and about half the population was born outside of the US. And so our goal was to have students and teachers sample their own products. And I really want to emphasize the importance of this. This is basically crowdsourcing this problem of identifying what products are actually used in various communities. We then brought the students into the lab and they started the testing. The testing was going to take more than a single day. So DTSC did the rest of the testing. And our goal was to provide the data to the students and that they would still have enough time in the school year to interrogate it and provide public comments to SCP. That last part didn't quite happen before the end of the school year, but the students were able to see the results of their testing. Next. So the students sampled 134 products, and there were a couple that had some surprising results. And we also noticed that the students struggled to categorize some products. Basically, every product that was marketed to an adult, the students characterized as marketed to elders, which makes sense from the perspective of a 14-year-old. But clearly we needed to provide better guidance to the students on how to categorize their products accurately. We got 45 products with quality pictures, and so that helped us verify the metadata or characterizations of the product. So even though we're being really conservative and just considering these 45 products, that still increased our overall sample size by about 30%. Next slide, please. But what's really important here is that the students' data really verified the environmental justice concern for 1,4-dioxane in Latinx products. So these are almost all of the 45 products that I discussed. And you can see the huge range in the Latinx products, out to about 225 parts per million. The median of the Latinx products is 62.2, and the null is just 2.5 parts per million. So there's a really disparate difference here. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the combined data from SCP in pink and the high school in gray. And the Latinx cleaning products are on top, but I want to focus on the personal care products down below. The range of the student data really elevated our concern for the levels of 1,4-dioxane in personal care products and will definitely influence our future prioritizations. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, these community science projects are really wonderful. They have the capacity to benefit students and SCP, but they require a significant investment in time to yield really meaningful results. And this project helped us better understand the challenges of conducting representative product surveys. And to get a representative sample, it really helps to engage with diverse demographic groups to get a good sense of what products are used and available in those communities. And lastly, this really helped to build SCP's capacity to better understand environmental justice or EJ concerns with consumer products. Next slide. And so I want to thank particularly the students of the Huntington Park Chemistry Club and Dr. Mui Kaltanoff for initiating this collaboration. And I want to thank all the other folks who were involved in this process. And thank you for listening. And so now I'm going to turn it back to Carl Palmer, who will finish out our short series of presentations by tying everything together and highlighting how SCP is working to build a toolkit of internal expertise that will help SCP have a greater impact as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks to all of our staff that presented and the teams that did all this work. There's no magic here in terms of tying it all together. I think you've heard me say in the past, and Meredith reminds me that I like to say that information is the coin of the realm. And as you know, some of our challenges have been collecting information. And what you see are some ways that we're getting new information and how we're working to develop capability to analyze that information. And as Meredith told me, we now have a little more change in our pocket with all these tools. But importantly, what we're doing is, as you know, we have a small group of folks and we're growing, but we need to grow our capability. And that relies on a couple of key things. One is, as we hire new staff, we're going to be looking for staff who have some of these skill sets already, and so that we can build on that capability. We're going to be looking to increase the capability of our current staff. And as you heard, unfortunately, we've lost a couple of key staff, but they've been great mentors. And so our staff work very cross-program within the program. And so we're looking at how we're going to enhance our training and capability there. But also, importantly, our collaborative efforts. We need to leverage as much skill and expertise as we can out there, outside of our program, both in the private sector, in academia, in other government agencies in other states. And so those efforts that we're taking are really important, and many of you are involved in those efforts, and we appreciate that. So what you got in this set of presentations was a snapshot of some of the things that we're doing, and these skills and tools can be applied to a much broader array of challenges as well. So we're trying to build our capability and to also, I think importantly, be able to point to credibly how we make our decisions. And as you know, we have great latitude in our decision making because we're not relying on proving something. We have a very precautionary approach that says, yes, if you get reliable data, you can make decisions based on that. But we still have a very strong commitment to rigor and credibility and transparency. So these efforts are ones that are going to grow, and we're going to build our capability, and we're going to rely on all of you and other collaborators to move forward. And so I hope this gave you some idea of some of the efforts we're doing to try to meet that goal. I'll turn it to Art.
Yeah, Carl, thank you very much. And also a big thank you to your colleagues, Andre, Topher, Qingyu, Tom, and Kelly for their just excellent presentations. At this point, we're going to take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, Kelly's going to open up a discussion session for all of the presentation topics. So it's what, 10:37? Come back at 10:50?
Yeah, so it's close to 10, be prompt exactly 10:50. If you have a topic that you think would be useful for the whole group to discuss, please be prepared to list that. You'll have to give it verbally and we'll make a list. And we should probably allow the first 10 minutes or so of the final hour for Q&A. I'd ask you to keep if you have questions, decide if those are questions that are going to inform the discussion or not. And otherwise, I'd ask you to take them offline because we don't have enough time. If we do wind up with time after the discussion, we can continue the Q&A at the end. So see you all at 10:50. All right, it's 10:50 a.m. So hopefully we can get the rest of the panelists back, or at least I hope you're here. We are going to, before we ask for topics, Dr. Brander is going to need to leave the meeting in just a moment. So I want to offer her the opportunity to make some comments in response to the charge questions that have been sent to the panel. Then we'll follow up by a quick request that I made to see if there's any topics that we want to discuss. And those, we'll see if there are any of those. Actually, and then we'll go into some Q&A, but I only want to allow about 10 minutes for that. And then after that, we can go into the panel discussion covering the topics. And we also have charge questions for the panel. So Dr. Brander, I hope you're able to unmute yourself and make any comments you'd like to make. Thanks.
Hi, Kelly, and I'm on my phone, so I don't have the charge questions in front of me at the moment, but I do have some general comments on the presentations that were given. Apologies, there was a graduate student defense time changed. Just a few comments, unless you wanted to review the charge questions first.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and then we can let you go.
Sure. So my first question on microplastics being added to the candidate chemicals list. Just had a question as to whether this class of chemicals should be broken down into additional categories. Do we need to, for example, consider things like fibers versus bioplastics? It seems so much broader than any other class of chemicals that has been added. And so just wanted to raise that question. I'm sure that's been thought about. And then a question about the Cleria database and app. I had some questions about how this is different or similar to other apps, like the one that is currently available from the Environmental Working Group. It seems like it's really similar and maybe has some additional features. But I imagine that might be a question from people using the app who are familiar with the EWG website and service. And also was wondering if that app would eventually include microplastics if these are added to the candidate chemicals list. And then my last question was about the presentation on children's exposure to EDCs. And I may have missed this, but I was wondering at what point in a child's lifetime does that consideration of exposure begin? And does it make sense for it to begin in utero, given how sensitive of an exposure period that window is? So those were my comments and questions on the presentations today. Thank you so much. And sorry, I have to leave early, and I have a few minutes if there are questions, clarifying questions for me.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I don't know if staff want to say anything at this time or just take those questions under consideration given the amount of time we have.
I can briefly answer the microplastics question. As I pointed out in my update, we were considering adding 2 classes of chemicals to the CC list, microplastics and PPDs. And we haven't launched that yet. We haven't vetted that yet. If we make that decision, what we will do is put out background documents and questions, and we'll have a public workshop and we'll have a lot of engagement. So the questions you asked, Suzanne, are really good questions and speak to, how would we define these chemicals for the listing? And we've been working extensively with the Water Board and others and what they're doing in microplastics. So there's a lot of discussion to come on that.
Okay, thank you so much. And sorry, I have to leave a bit early. And thank you for all of your wonderful presentations this morning.
Thank you, Suzanne. So at this point, I wanted to just solicit from the panel if there were any specific topics they thought would merit the discussion of the full panel. And I'm going to ask you to use your raise hand function and to keep it really brief. So we're just kind of see if there's a list beyond the charge questions. All right, well, that simplifies things because I'm not seeing any responses to that. The panel has a set of charge questions that were in the background document. For panelists, that's posted, and all the attendees as well can see that. They are posted in the chat, so everyone can see what's out there. Let's start with about 10 minutes of questions for the staff in response to the presentations. And just if you have a question for the staff and you're on the panel, please raise your hand. If anyone's having trouble with the raise hand function, please put a note in the chat and the staff will point you to it. And I see Dennis quickly got his hand up, followed by Melanie. So go ahead, Dennis.
Okay, well, I spent the break time confirming my suspicion that there's a very active research focus right now on potential allergenicity of quaternary ammonium compounds. And I think I was a little cryptic in terms of describing my time at the California Department of Public Health, but I was section chief at HESIS, and HESIS has kind of got a radar functions ever since DBCP, the DBCP debacle for identifying emerging hazards. So I realized that there's a little bit of balkanization around the responsibility for regulating surface disinfectants, because technically they're classified as pesticides. But I just wanted to encourage Tom and whoever else is working on quats to try to, if you will, network with the people at DPR and the people at the occupational health branch at CDPH around issues of allergic sensitization, including asthma related to quats. So that was more of a editorial than a question.
Tom?
Thank you.
Okay. Perhaps that's it. So we've got Melanie and Mike, and I'm going to put Tim Malloy in the queue at some point. Melanie, you're up. Melanie, are you? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I was not muted, and I just muted myself, and then I had to unmute myself. Okay, so second Dennis's comment. Dennis, I think quaternary ammonium compounds are considered asthmagens. There's not a very long list of asthmagens, so that's something to look into. For when you guys worked with the high school, did you actually go to the high school and try to recruit specific groups of kids? Were they all Hispanic, or was there any opportunity to recruit African-American kids? You had a broader array of products to sample. So I don't know who answers that question.
Kelly looks ready. Yeah.
Sure. So this partnership, I sort of walked into it already. We at ECL Pasadena had already set it up. And so it sort of worked out really well for our project on 1,4-dioxane. We are looking to expand it to other high schools. But it's, I think, a question of, networking and trying to find teachers who are willing to start this kind of partnership, because it took a lot of effort on the teachers' parts to find time for us to talk to the chemistry club and think the teachers actually paid for pizza to bribe the students to come. So, you know, I mean, it takes a dedicated teaching staff to do this as well. And so we would like to expand this, and it's just a question of how can we do that in a way that's scalable.
Yeah.
Thank you. So next up is Mike, Tim, and Julie. And after you've asked your question, please put your hand down. Mike, you're up.
Okay, and I'm going to keep Kelly Grant on the hot spot here. So I, you know, I think it's a wonderful program. I think involving kids at that age in this sort of thing and inspiring them to be interested is a great future-facing effort. But I was curious with the Latinx products that you tested, and I know they brought them in, so you were lucky to get 45 pictures out of the lot. Do you know if those were all U.S.-based company products, or were they bringing things from other parts of the world that wouldn't necessarily be easy to find on the shelves in the state of California? And then the follow-up to that is, if they weren't US-based, how do you enforce on a non-US-based company?
Those are all great questions. So I do know that one of the teachers bought some of the products at a swap meet. And so I'm not quite sure the origins of all of those off the top of my head, but we have the information about the product manufacturer. We have images of all those products. In our own testing, there were clearly some products that had a secondary label on them that was bilingual. So I suspect that they were not necessarily products manufactured specifically for the US market. But I think in terms of compliance, those are going to be questions that Carl can tackle.
Well, and just briefly, good point, Mike, is that, you know, we're just trying to get the information in the first place. You know, we're not regulating any of these things as a priority product, but if we were to, we'd have to look closely at, is that product sold in the US? How is it manufactured? Would we have reach to the manufacturers? That's generally a challenge in products coming to California from all over the world. And our enforcement reach is limited, but our market strength is strong. So we try to leverage that, but we're not there yet.
I love that this presentation and that project generated so much interest. So we've got a few more minutes for questions. I've got Tim and Julie's hand went up and down, so I don't know if she wants to continue. And then we'll go on to a round robin on the charge questions. So Tim, you're up.
Thank you, Kelly. Kelly, I have what I think are two quick questions, one for Topher and one for
That's okay.
Carl. Can I ask them both? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, terrific. So Topher, thank you for that presentation. Hugely exciting, really thoughtful. I was reading an article from 2021 where EPA folks had done this mining project using Nielsen product information. And I'm curious, it seems like two similar but different approaches. And I'm curious, when you talk about future work and the MOU with EPA, whether you could foresee using an approach like that to complement it. In part, I'm wondering about issues of how representative the groups are that you're getting information on, given that the Cleria is online products and the Nielsen one seems to have a broader representation of different groups.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you, Tim. It's an excellent question. I guess I'm going to give a relatively general answer. You know, I think one of the things I wanted, and this is also frankly partly in response to Suzanne's question comment earlier. I think one of the things maybe I didn't emphasize enough in my talk is, you know, Cleria is one tool and one tool in the toolbox, so to speak, right? So I think, I mean, another way of looking at this, perhaps, I feel like when I was thinking of this image came to mind when listening to your question, is that one of the beauties, but also one of the challenges of some of this kind of work is that it tends to be perhaps a little kaleidoscopic in the sense, right, that you get you get a window over here and a window over here. And sometimes, frankly, I think it is going to be difficult for us to have a really clear picture for, to what extent or do these things really overlap at all? And so, it's a kind of multifaceted, but potentially also somewhat fragmented picture. Like I wasn't clear, for example, when you use the word group. I'm not totally sure if you're talking about product group, chemical group, or consumer group, but all of those things overlap. I mean, I think certainly like we have had, like we've used some Nielsen data, we tend to use that more for sort of product information, right? I didn't have the time to talk at all about, sorry, I think it was at least Chin Yu, if not Tom, mentioned Mintel. So, there are other data sources that we use. I think basically, certainly, whether it's getting access to data, through another group like EPA. I mean, mostly I just think everything is on the table as far as we're concerned, and it's mostly limited by our capacity, to develop the partnerships and work with the data and just try and understand as best we can how to paint a coherent picture. One that, of course, that we can explain and justify. So I know, again, I'm sorry, I know it's kind of a slightly general answer, but it's probably about as good as I can do off the top, just at the moment.
And let me add on to Topher too, Tim, that if you look at what the work we've done on the call-in information from manufacturers of nail products, which was extensive, coupled with our new authority in SB 502 to actually have manufacturers provide information, there's going to be, I think, opportunities to work more with manufacturers to fill some of those gaps. What we're trying to do when we couldn't get information is find sources of information here at the retail level so that we could scale up our analysis. So not to discount the level of effort it takes to do that, because our nail product call-in, there were tens of thousands of data points that we're still sorting through. And much as you saw in Topher's presentation, the ability to match data and make sure you're talking about the same thing is challenging. But I think there's opportunities there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was a terrific answer, Topher, not to general law. And actually, Carl, your comment kind of leads to segues into my other question, which was, it seems like the program's getting more mature in its capabilities to kind of pull data and methods. And I'm wondering, is there kind of a strategic planning process for near-term, long-term, like how you're going to match these different capabilities? It feels a little bit like maybe it's sort of informed, opportunistic approach right now, or maybe, and I'm wondering, do you see yourself, or have you already kind of started to move towards, okay, here's a vision of where we want to be in 5 years, 10 years. How do we put the pieces together to have that?
Great question. Yeah, we have. And in fact, Topher is going to be one of the key people in leading that effort in this new set of resources in our reorg. We created a unit that's dedicated to data science and information, knowing very well that we're going to have to navigate all these different sources and methods and do that in a logical and fruitful way. So yeah, it's developing. We don't know how we're going to get there yet, but all of these things are becoming part of the menu, and we'll be trying to figure out the best way to get there.
Somehow I'm suspecting the panel might help with that, either through offline contacts or perhaps in a future meeting. So we've got Jack, Julie, and Elaine. We're running out of question time, but if these questions are really good, so I don't want to cut it off if it's an important question.
So me?
Yeah, you're up.
Just a quick question. Cleria relies on information, I believe that's probably on the labels of products, as scribed by the retailers. But yet something like Smart Label actually is the retailer's own version of that. And it also in many cases gives fragrance information, which is not available on the retailer site. So I'm just curious as to whether Smart Label has even been consulted. It also, I've seen problems with retailers' websites that they're outdated. They can actually be talking about products that are no longer on market, yet Cleria is going to be reporting that if that's what's on the retailer's website. Next thing, you on the antimicrobials, the quats, you actually did not indicate that antimicrobial hand soaps are actually drugs. So you're gonna have to worry about that. And it's a major point of consideration by the FDA. And I just want to echo, I think, Mike's comments on the source of some of those products for the Hispanic market. Are they gray market items? Are they actually legally being sold in the state of California?
Do staff want to react to any of that before we move on to, we're still in the question period, Julie and then Elaine.
Well, I think, go ahead, Tover.
I don't necessarily have a lot to add. I mean, Jack, I think you've made excellent points. I tried to acknowledge during my talk that, the data that Clery can scrape from these retailers' websites is obviously only as good as, as the information that can be found on those websites. And yes, we recognize that's a limitation. Again, to the smart label, it's a great question. I'm familiar in a general sense with smart label. It hasn't really come up practically thus far, although I should say that it may have in other contexts or in conversations I just haven't yet been a part of, but mostly just to emphasize again that nothing as far as I'm concerned is off the table. If we can make productive use of a data set, assuming we have access to it, then that's great.
All right, Julie and then Elaine.
Hi, one of the panel comments is I think these are great projects. So I want to encourage DTSC to continue them. It's wonderful to see certainly the data mining and the environmental justice is a very important topic that resonates very much with many of the people I'm working with these days. I did have a question. So there was a lot of discussion about the databases of Cleria and Mintel, et cetera. But my question was to Ching-Tu about the SysRev literature review. Is that scholarly literature, journal papers, or is it a broader or different data set?
Thank you, Julie. Those are great questions. Yes, those are the papers we draw from a PubMed, Science Direct, Scope, and EM base. So basically, we got about 11,000, more than 11,000 articles, and then the script, just distill it down to about 100. So that's using the systematic review approach.
Okay, great. Sounds like a great tool also. Thank you.
Thank you both. And Elaine, I think you're up next.
Thank you. Yeah, very exciting group of projects, and I can see that you're poised to really more rapidly make progress on screening and prioritizing. So I guess my question, and I'm not sure how much you could even get to right now, but I'm trying to understand how data development sort of fits in. There was the little bit of work that you're describing in terms of actually doing some measurements of what's in products, but to the point about products changing and ingredient lists changing and websites changing, I'm curious how much you're doing or thinking about in terms of data development.
Carl or Andre, do one of you want to take? I mean, I could take a shot at that, but I feel like it's actually a more general question that one of you might be better at.
So,
well,
go ahead, Carl.
I'll start, and then you guys can chime in. I mean, it's a really good question, Elaine. I think we're just scratching the surface of the capability, and there's a lot of factors we need to consider. So, if you have or others have thoughts on how we need to approach that and what those considerations are, that'd be helpful. I think part of the thing too is, stepping back a little, is our process has been fairly lengthy and very transparent and externally engaged. So we put out a background document and we get comments, and then we have a workshop, et cetera. So we're hoping to accelerate that process somewhat, and some of that's going to be dependent on the ability to get information from people who actually know more about the information than what we can glean. So those questions about timing are important. And I think ultimately we're going to be looking at some of the manufacturers of products to fill in some of those blanks if we're going down the wrong rabbit hole, or if we're missing the mark. I'm not sure if Andre, if you want to add anything.
Well, I was just, I guess, a point of clarification, data development, you mean like sort of actually analyzing consumer products in the lab, or just finding data sets? Because I think, you know, the lab will have a small part of our informing us on what's in consumer products, but it's you know, it's expensive, it's slow. There are data sets that are available that we've identified and started using, and you know, we will continue to want to expand the scope of that. I don't know that actually analyzing samples will be the primary way we'll, at least in the initial prioritization step, identify leads, things that we want to pursue, strings we want to pull.
You know, I think your follow-up question is it's probably really important in terms of what I was thinking about, and it may be now that I'm moving beyond questions, because I just have the sense the more that I'm doing work right now, especially in PFAS, but in general, how we anticipate, screen and anticipate, you know, in a way that we're identifying big problems before they're big problems. And I you know, I get concerned in general that we're the whole under the lamppost thing is still, no matter how much data we're scrubbing, that we're still looking under the lamppost. And you know, and then when you bring in EJ and particular communities and have people bringing in products and stuff, I think this is all very, very exciting and very important. So then my question is, you know, what are the other ways that we can kind of get at these signals early on? You know, do we need to, you're California, and I'm always amazed at how proactive and how much resources you put in to, you know, sort of being at the forefront of environmental issues. You know, do you need to be, you know, should the next little projects you focus on be thinking about how you do sort of residential dust and air screening that would, you know, in some kind of suspect or non-targeted way, suspect screening or non-targeted way, identify problems, you know, that then you would go back and find what products are associated with chemicals. So anyway, I think I'm probably going beyond questions. Sorry.
That's okay. Before I want to, in fact, now is a good time to shift into panelists' general comments. I did want to ask one final question, which is whether the staff had any sense whether the data sets that we've been mining are inclusive of products that would be marketed to disadvantaged communities. I'm a little nervous that a lot of these wind up picking out products that go to the more privileged community.
I know that the Cleria data set has it can be done. You can screen for other types of data in addition to ingredient data. And in fact, Cleria has partnered with a campaign for safe cosmetics on the Black Beauty Project, for example. So there are all kinds of data in addition, obviously, marketing data that's on websites. So granted, you know, maybe not everybody shops on the web, and that may already sort of skew the products, but nevertheless, it can, you know, that is an angle that could be pursued.
Thank you, and thanks for acknowledging your thinking about it. So now let's move into panelists' comments and reactions. We have half an hour or so. We may squish the end of the meeting, the final remarks here, make sure there's enough time. And again, use the hand raise function. I do want to make sure everybody has time to weigh in, and we'll make an attempt to, if someone raises something really huge, to solicit other folks' thoughts, but it may be difficult to orchestrate a real conversation in the time and with the Zoom limitations. So Melody and Anne went up first, so let's go. Melanie, you're up.
Okay.
Hey, Melanie, did you mute yourself, or I'm not sure what's going on?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on either. I was going to look at the questions for the panel. So question 1, are these projects a good use of DTSC's time and effort? I think so. You're getting more information than you have been able to get before. Do you have any additional resources that we should consider as we complete these projects? Yeah, I just wonder how much you're working with OEHA toxicologists who are looking at alternative methods for evaluating hazard, because it's not very simple. And so if you have a lot of people already thinking about it, it would be good to tap into them. Meredith is looking funny. Like, yeah, we've been talking about it with them, but you cannot steal those people from OEHA. I'll get in a lot of trouble if you do that.
I can just comment briefly on that, Melanie. I know Ann Cooper and her team have been talking to OEHA about different tools, NAMs, and other things that can be applied. I mean, there's some expertise in OEHA that we don't have, and we're getting input on that. It's helpful. I think in the long run, it's going to be a resource question too, both for OEHA and for us, but we are trying to make some of those connections.
Okay. Then what is the best format to publicize our results about this work? So I think you guys are already thinking about journal articles, but you should have some sort of easy to understand posts for your web page too.
Melanie, is that everything, or do you want? Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, let's move on. Anne's up, then Emma, then Molly, then Art. And please put your hand down after you've weighed in. Thank you.
I'm lowering my hand so I don't forget. Thank you all. I wanted to come in here at the risk of sounding like, back in my day, but a handful of us have been on this committee since 2009. And I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on where we are in the maturation of this program. And the stuff that we're talking about today was really unimaginable when we started this program in terms of data and data tools. And so I just wanted the fact that you've created a data science team, and you could not have picked a better person to lead it, by the way. So just a little plug there for Topher, given his experience and the way he thinks about these things. I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge how far we've come with this, and huge compliments to all of DTSC staff over the years, and particularly this group, and I'm excited about it growing. So to those questions, I think you're already getting a hint from the comments so far about whether these projects are a good use of your time. Absolutely. I wanted to address something that Topher brought up when your caveats about Cleria. You said, one of the caveats is that it doesn't cover all the products, the relevant SCP products, but the fact that it covers as many as it does, I think that's what you're going to see in a lot of the tools that you encounter. So that's, I appreciate the caveats, but that's a caveat on the caveat, is that, you go where you can with the rich data sets that you have, and several have been mentioned. Just in terms of the projects being a good use of DTSC's time and effort, I also wanted to say congratulations on the array of collaborators that you've selected, from agencies to NGOs to academia to the community folks. That is phenomenal that you're thinking this broadly. And Elaine, thank you for voicing. You're right, that is sort of a forefront thing that I don't know any other agency that's trying to reach so many collaborators. And frankly, with the complexity of data we have out there, I think that's the only approach you can take. So bully for you for the capabilities and increasing your capabilities in this way. And then I wanted to add a couple of resources. Some of them you may already know, in terms of let's see, systematic review. I'm new to this, but I'm learning as I learn from my new grantees and my new role as a philanthropist of this work. I know I'm still not used to that. UCSF's program on reproductive health and the environment, I know has Meredith is nodding, so you probably know these folks already, expanding their efforts on systematic review and that methodology. So, and then I just found a resource on the human exposome piece. I just found a resource from some of my grantees that are working on European chemicals policy. This is a European Commission funded research program on the human exposome, particularly early life exposures. It's called ATHLETE. During the break, I looked up to see what ATHLETE stood for. Advancing Tools for Human Early Life Course Exposure Research and Translation. It's athleteproject.eu. I don't know any of the folks there yet, but I do know some of the NGO coalitions in the EU that are partnering with them in that research project. So that was one. Let's see, other. I think I would echo Melanie's idea about having some short summaries to post on the website to talk about this work. And then your last question about messaging. You have comms folks in your staff or a comms consultant. I think one of the key things you need to ask is who are your audiences, and maybe split your audiences a bit, because you're talking to everyone from your legislative partners in the California legislature to other researchers to the general public. So just think about who your key audiences are and what materials would be most useful to them. So thanks.
Thanks, Anne. That's a lot in a little bit of time. Emma, Molly, Art, Tim, Elaine. You're up, Emma.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yes, just to go through the questions like everyone else has, are these projects a good use of DTSC's time and effort? Absolutely. I was really, really impressed by the approaches, the topics that are chosen, how they're carefully thought out and very well presented, and thank you. I want to focus on the resources and publicizing results. The one thing that came to mind is sharing the data when you've completed your collection and analysis and QA, etc. A topic that is repeatedly coming up across activities I'm involved in is access to data, sharing data, housing data, standardizing data, being able to utilize data in multiple places. And so I would like to encourage consideration of where you might house your data, whether you might want to share that with certain EPA ORD databases, for example, and how to make sure it's accessible and usable to others, because we have so much work to do. We don't need to duplicate effort. And so in terms of publicizing results, maybe where you place the data set, the availability of the data set and the access of the data set is one piece of that. Of course, traditional approaches to publicizing the data, whether it's peer-reviewed publication, conference presentation, your website, etc., should be considered. And also maintaining your use of video, like Carl's recorded message for this call today. We, of course, have to consider our younger generations, and that the video format is really important to them, and what is the right platform for video messaging, and how do you connect that back to the actual data. Those are my key pieces I wanted to share. Would be happy to talk more about that sometime. And the last question, how do we message the work to alleviate lack of understanding about these types of special projects? I contemplated that for a moment, and then I thought, well, this is science, and is this stemming a little bit back to how do scientists go about collecting information and making observations in order to draw conclusions? How does that fit into science policy, whether it's DTSC or other organizations? And then how does that inform regulation? And it comes a little bit back to education. So the idea of working with communications department, I think, is an excellent one. Education. Yes, so my last point, we got to see Kelly in the lab with young people, and those of us who are staying attuned of what's going on in the green chemistry world know that education, early education, especially high school through college, of people who are going to work in the chemistry space about what chemistry is, and how chemistry impacts the world continues to be a really important topic, even though we've been talking about it for a couple decades. And I think that was really exciting to see you all in the community, in the lab, not only hearing the community's real exposure story, but also bringing that back through an educational process. So really commend you. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. A lot of important things to think about. So Molly, Art, Elaine, Helen's having power problems, and Helen, the queue here is Molly, Molly, Art, Elaine, Jack, and I'm gonna queue you in after Jack if you want to say anything. So Molly, it's yours.
Thanks, Kelly. Not going through all of them, but at least 3 of the questions. Absolutely a great use of effort by the staff. I just think that, these exploratory studies, allow for a deeper dive into the assets that are available to the program and a validation of those assets. And so I just think it's a testament to DTSC staying on top of new data sources and opportunities and looking deeply into them as to whether or not they'll serve the mission of the program. So I definitely think these kinds of projects are incredibly valuable. In terms of, I'm moving on to 3, publicizing the work. Obviously, short briefs on your website. I do think journal articles, I get they're really intensive to put together, but are really important, to lift up the type of deep research that DTSC is doing. And I, being an officer of our A4, the Association for the Advancement of Alternatives Assessment, would love to share it with the A4 community. We have a very strong distribution list of about 1,200 people that are very focused on informed substitution. So sharing what you've learned with the broader global community around that, love to service that through our A4 community and getting things out through our newsletter. In terms of messaging the work, I mean, to me, this is something that I'm thinking about, of having all these array of data. And I think something, I don't know, maybe I'm positioning this on you, Topher, in terms of your data science team, but to message why this work is relevant to the regulatory program, it might just be helpful to have some sort of thought paper that talks about how these data are ultimately used to inform decision making. It speaks to what Emma was kind of going down as well, but the notion of data integration. Sometimes I think about all of this data and I look at it going like, how do you process and then synthesize and see the strategic opportunities that it's trying to tell you? So having a little bit more clarity for the audiences in terms of how it's actually used and integrated and starts to point the finger towards strategic needs for priority products or for the program itself would be useful. I also think it would be useful because it would show us that sometimes more data is just more data, and that also can speak to the fact that sometimes we don't have to look a lot further to know what we already know. And knowing that all these programs are resource strapped, even though you're hiring a number of people, to have reviews of what processes are been effective in pointing towards strategic directions versus just giving you more data and more data on top of those strategic opportunities that you already know would be really helpful. I'll leave it at that.
So thanks. And as I transition to Art, I want to say that Molly just effectively made one of my main comments, which is that you can actually do this in a figure or illustration, show how the various projects and the nature of the projects would feed into the program's decision-making, particularly in the priority product work plan. I think that would be a really good tool to communicate this, as simple as a figure, to really show the workflow and how that works through your strategic thinking. Art.
Yeah, I'm going to make my comments short and quick because we're running out of time. So I totally agree with other people's support of that. These projects are good use of the department's time and effort. But I do have an issue in that the value of doing them are not obvious, at least not obvious to the public and even to people outside of that are really, that have a deep knowledge of what the program is about. And I think that is problematic. Besides the fact that it has to be good use of time, but it should be, the ROI has to be really obvious, because again, this is we're not doing academic research. This is an effort to make policy or the products better. So I think making the value more obvious, it's really important. On the resources, so basically what you're doing is that you're generating and collecting big data. And so you need to come up with, so Topher, I'm sure you and your team are already thinking about this, come up with a way of, storing data. So something like a data lake that can handle structured and unstructured data, and layer on top of the data lake some kind of software that touches on what Molly was talking about in terms of, democratizing the data, making the data actually meaningful and useful, and not just have a big data set. So that's something that's important. Just a quick comment about the journal articles. I think journal articles are really important, especially when it comes to, showing something that it's scientifically defensible and in terms of advancing the science. But that by itself is just not enough, because again, this has to do with us connecting with the public so they understand the department's work, what they're doing and how they're doing it, such that it leads to improving consumer products that are safer for the public and for the environment. So scientific journals, yes, absolutely, but that it's not enough. And I would not put that as the most important thing to do. Let me stop there. I'm looking at the clock right now. So Kelly, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we can run over a couple more minutes. So I've got Elaine, Jack, I'm going to check in with Helen and then move on to Tim and Julie.
Okay, so actually Art set that up pretty nicely. Well, everybody, I'll agree with everybody, but I will say that to me, what I see, first of all, one of the things I see that's been really important in what you presented today was a focus on the exposure side, which is, it's an important component of how you decide what to pursue and what to regulate. So it's nice that you're building out that toolbox that Topher talked about. The methodologies are not as well developed as on the tox side. So it's in that sense, it is critical that you're doing this. Building lines of evidence, which the fact that you're going to systematic review, the fact that you're going more data driven and, that you're, so I think in terms of laying out what are the lines of evidence that you're trying to build out and how are the tools and the sort of case examples that you're using to evaluate and build out your tools and your methodologies. How do they support those particular lines of evidence is really important. Being able to publish or make public not just some kind of data set, but the code and workflows for how you actually use that, so that your regulated entities and your stakeholders can. You've emphasized transparency. You've always been transparent, but being able, the more you get to this kind of more complicated data-driven analyses, the more you need to really codify what are these processes that you're using and what are those workflows. And then I'm just going to throw in my plug that I've sort of my little soapbox I've been on the past few years on every committee that I sit on is what are other lines of evidence beyond what I am concerned can be limited information, especially on the exposure side, because there is so little investment generally on measurements. What are other lines of evidence? How can you use other kinds of survey data and information, measured environmental concentrations in terms of more geospatial kinds of data? And in terms of resources, I do think it's, in looking at these other lines of evidence, I'm thinking of California researchers and academic programs, people like Tracy Woodruff's lab, where they really are doing non-targeted in pregnancy cohorts, and people like Debbie Bennett, who are really come from an exposure modeling background, but are really understanding that house dust and residential measurements of chemicals and how those are associated with products is just more and more going to be what we need to do to advance in this area. So I will pass the baton. Thank you all. It's just a wonderful set of talks.
Thank you, Elaine. So we are running short of time. I'm going to let this go a few extra minutes. We've got Jack. I'm going to check in with Helen, then Tim and Julie.
My comments will echo some of those that have been heard before. Are the projects good use of DTSC's time and effort? Yes, but I think you need to make sure you couch them in terms of the bigger context of what you're doing. Carl talked about 4 products coming up, 2 of which are tires. None of these projects have anything to do with tires. So how can you have to put these current projects in line with what's actually being done on the priority products that you're getting ready to regulate now. And that brings me just to communication. I'll echo what Ann had said earlier. Know your audience. You need communication experts. I think what you need to really do is pick an audience and then make sure that you tailor the message toward that audience. I'm particularly impressed with involving the high school students, because that's a really good avenue to show that you're really worried about the environmental justice aspect of the regulation. And if you actually can, we'll say I won't say a press release, but something along those lines saying, hey, look what we're doing with this, even if the results are inconclusive or not valid, the fact that you're involving students from a very wide variety of backgrounds, I think really gets them involved in the entire regulatory process and will actually serve your needs really well.
Thank you, Jack. I was going to check with Helen, but her power loss seems to have disconnected her entirely. So I'll move on to Tim and Julie and see if we can get Helen back. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. I'll be brief. Just 2 points. I just want to emphasize, I still feel like the department could benefit by having a more explicit and public-facing strategic planning process at this point. It feels to me like you've matured to the point as a program where you should be thinking about, 5 years out and how all these things thread together. You have more resources. I mean, you're less constrained than you used to be, but they're not infinite resources. And it also goes to the communication issue of, we've been talking about communication and folks have rightly said, identify your audience. But on the other hand, I think there's a strategic question about who is your audience? Why are you trying to communicate with people? And how does that fit in with all the other aspects of your program? So I guess I come back to this notion of it would be nice to know that there was kind of an intentional, forward-looking, transparent, and participatory process for figuring out how all these capabilities are linked to your specific goals and where your specific objectives on a timeline. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tim. Julie, you're up, and then if Helen's not back, I'll make just a couple of interventions briefly, and we'll wrap up the meeting. So it's yours,
Thank
Julie.
you. Thank you, Kelly. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Great. I want to again say that I think these are great directions. And as Anne commented, when we started this program years ago, I don't think any of us could see this type of activity. So it's encouraging to see the program mature, but not stagnate. So that's wonderful. I have a comment about audience, and I think that that's really relevant, that your communications needs to think hard about your audiences. And I want to mention one that I haven't heard really explicitly brought up, and that is that this isn't really your mandate, but it would be wonderful if we would get to a point where we would not need this program anymore, and have young scientists and engineers and people who are designing formulations and products have the tools available to them at their decision point to not put these chemicals in the first place. And that's something that many of us speak to. The Greener Solutions program at Berkeley does some of that, and I teach all levels of students from freshmen all the way through graduating PhD students. And I see them and I tell them this, that they are my seeds. I am sending them out into the world with more knowledge about the chemicals we use, the materials we choose to put in products, so that they can at least raise the question. As Debbie used to say, right, is it necessary? Do we need this material or substance, or can we actually do this a different way, either through a substitute or through a completely different product design? So I'd like you to indeed continue to do your journal papers, because that's the avenue by which graduate students mostly find this kind of information. But also think about if there's a way to balance the need for just simplified public domain information with the real need for science-based content, so that when you are saying, that you're looking at these quacks, what are they? What's the chemistry? Why are they a problem? So that the scientists can also better understand what the issues are and how they can either work with them or work around them. Because there's clearly a need to reach the legislators and the public and the manufacturers and retailers and a wide audience, but there is this audience of our future scientists and engineers, our earlier career professionals, that need also information so that they can change the way we do things. And someday we might not need to go back in and ask a manufacturer to take it out. Maybe it just won't go in there in the first place. So those are my thoughts. Again, thank you for all the wonderful work. Wonderful to see the program growing and expanding.
Thank you very much, Julie. Melanie, we are out of time, so if you have a one-sentence follow-up, I'd be happy to entertain it, but otherwise I think we need to move on. Right, I guess that answered that question. I just wanted to briefly support the themes that the other panelists have raised, the idea of some strategic planning, integrating perhaps through the work plan, helping people understand how these kinds of projects fit in. I personally think they're very important because there are few other people in the world asking these kinds of questions, and the way that they can develop a strategy for prioritization and implementing your work that's the most cost-effective way. I appreciate the partnerships that you have developed with other people who are thinking about these kinds of things, EPA and the West Coast states. So it feels like you're doing the right thing. It's about how you think about it. If you think about how this fits in through some kind of flow chart and in the work plan a little bit, you might get some really interesting feedback in terms of other things to pursue. So for example, I didn't hear anything about thinking about the aquatic data and dust data. Those were a couple of things that, so monitoring data, environmental monitoring data. And I know you're doing that. It's just, it wasn't discussion today. And I see a lot of parallels here again to the Department of Pesticide Regulation Safer Consumer Products program. They do put little study summaries up on their website, so they tell people what they're working on, and have done a nice job of publishing papers, a less good job on some of the communication aspects. I think you got some great feedback on that today. So with that, I think there's a lot of consensus for support for the program, doing this kind of work and understanding its importance. Folks may have other resources that they think of after the meeting, which I would certainly encourage panelists to send individually to the staff who've always have been, and to also thank both the panelists and the staff who've been very generous with their time. The panelists have offline conversations, and you've heard about some collaborations today that show me how much the science panel members are as individual folks supporting this program, which is really important for our state. So with that, I guess I would like to call the discussion to an end, and turn over the opportunity to make some thanks to Art, if you wanted to say any final words before we pass it back to Meredith and Carl.
Let's pass it back to Meredith and Carl.
Just making sure on Melanie. If she has that one sentence.
Yeah, I had that one sentence. Kelly chastised me rightly for putting stuff into the chat, which I should be saying. So I just want to say that I agreed with Elaine that exposure is always so difficult to characterize well, and that, the people she mentioned are great. Debbie Bennett is great. Maybe Callipia can provide some funding to her for specific projects. I don't know. There's also California collects water quality data that could be integrated somehow. Biomonitoring data, which you guys already.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We need to keep up our work to connect with those folks, which we do on a regular basis. In fact, later at 12 o'clock, we'll be talking to some of them, some of those partners. So I'm going to be very brief and just say thank you, and great way to end the year. Happy holidays, and thank you for your time. I'm very energized by the presentations today, by your support for what the program's trying to do, the way they're approaching things. I do think communication opportunities abound, and I'll certainly be encouraging the team to pursue those. So thank you for your time, and Carl, bring us home.
Yeah, thanks, Meredith. Again, my overarching feeling right now is gratitude to all of you for your input and support. It's really important for our staff to hear from you. And I think that communication theme that I heard is really important on many levels, not just for our public stakeholders, but for our staff, that they know they're connected to people in the community of practice and in the real world, and that what they're doing is important and valuable. So thank you. And thanks to our outstanding staff as well. And we've got a lot of information, and I think we'll be looking to next spring come back and talk with you about some of these things. I know Meredith has that look on her face like, okay, Carl, where's the action plan? And we will be doing that. Again, thank you so much. And I hope you all have good health and have some time for yourself at this time of the season. And thank you. Especially, I want to do a particular shout out to Kelly and Art for their leadership and commitment. They do a lot of behind the scenes work. I want to do a shout out for Chris Leonetti and of our staff, who's been herding the cats on our sides to make this all happen. And again, thank you all so much.
All right. So Dennis wants to say thank you before. I'm just saying goodbye. All right, so I want to thank everyone for their time and attention and call this meeting to a close. I echo the thanks for Chris, who has just been awesome picking up in a quick situation, and thank my co-chair and all of you. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.